Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. Just making sure this is okay. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and learn about solving absolute values with inequalities. I would say the main key is to focus on these two equations right here. If the absolute value of x is less than a number, that's what a stands for. That means that number is going to be between that negative a and that positive a. Let's say for 7, the absolute value of x is less than 7. That means the number here in between x could be a range. That's what inequalities mean. It's like a range of answers, not just one answer anymore. So x could be, let's say, the absolute value of negative 6. Absolute value of negative 6 is actually 6, and 6 is less than 7. So that means it has to be between the numbers 7. Here, if the absolute value of x is greater than a, so let's say greater than 7, that means it has to be, so x has to be less than negative 7, or it has to be greater than the positive 7. So you're using these two kind of like a formula kind of to fill in and plug in to solve these type of equations. Keep in mind, whenever it says or, it doesn't mean choose one or the other. This whole statement is one answer. Let's go ahead and get started. So example 1, the absolute value of x is less than 4. If we're going up here, and this is like a chart to go by. If it's a less than symbol, basically it's the inequality symbol. If it's less than a number, that means x could be between the two numbers, between the positive number and the negative number. So that's why I have this equation that's from the top here, because it's less than. It's this equation right here. Now, it's between less than negative a and positive a. So the a stands for is our number on the side. So it could be between negative 4 and positive 4. That's it. If you were to graph this is considered an and inequality. The book has it, they wrote it as x is greater than negative 4, x is less than 4. You could do that. I think this way is a lot easier. I use this for algebra too. So then you have your negative 4, you have your positive 4, your circles, and whenever you have an inequality like that, that's the and inequality. That means x is between the two numbers. Remember, inequalities mean it's a range of answers. B, the absolute value of x is greater than 7. So that means we're going to follow the second one. X is going to be less than negative 7, or x is going to be greater than positive 7. So then you have your formula to follow by, and since the absolute value of x is greater than 7, that means the number here has to be a variety of numbers. So now we have this. What this means, if we were to graph it, that means x could be any number after negative 7. So it could be negative 8, negative 10. Or it could be greater than 7. So it could be 8, it could be 9, it could be 10. And that's what this means. If I put 8, the absolute value of 8 is greater than 7, that makes sense. How about negative 8? The absolute value of negative 8 is greater than 7. Absolute value of negative 8 is positive 8, and 8 is greater than 7. So these two, basically these two things are what you're focusing on. Example 2. Before we even begin to find the two ranges, we have to make sure the absolute value is by itself on one side. So here, it's not by itself on one side. The inequality is right here. It looks like we can get it by itself on one side by subtracting both sides to get it by itself. So you're subtracting, adding or subtracting, you're not changing the sign. It just stays as less than or equal to. And 9.8 minus 7.4, I get 2.4. So now I have the absolute value is less than or equal to 2.4. If I go back to this, it's a less than symbol. That means it's between the negative and positive answer. So that means it's between negative 2.4. And keep in mind, if you have that line underneath, you have to include it with all of these here. It's between negative 2.4 and positive 2.4. And that's it. I'm not going to graph it. You're not going to really graph these this year. And that would be your answer. Here, same thing. X is not by itself, or the absolute value of x is not by itself. You have to get it by itself. 4 is dividing into x, so you're going to multiply both sides. So now you get x, the absolute value of x is greater than 8. So 2 times 4 is 8. Remember, signs don't change unless it's a negative. You're dividing or multiplying by negative. Now you have x is being greater than 8, so then you follow this formula. According to this, x has to be less than the negative solution, negative 8, or x has to be greater than the positive solution, which is 8. And this will just be your answer here. Keep in mind, this has to be a positive number. Later on, we're going to deal with if it's a negative or not. So then this will be your answer. The whole thing, not this or that. You guys have been writing one of them, not both of them. You have to include the word or too. This is one inequality. Next one, negative 2 times the absolute value of x is less than negative 6. Negative 2 is multiplying into the absolute value of x. I want to get rid of it. That crosses out because I'm dividing. So the absolute value of x, when I'm dividing or multiplying by a number less than 0, or just a negative number, your signs change. So instead of facing that way, it's going to face to the right. So now you have negative 6 divided by negative 2, positive 3. X, absolute value of x is greater than 3. So then, going here, it's a greater than symbol. That means x has to be less than negative 3, or x has to be greater than just 3. And if you draw that out, you have here, and you have here. And that's what it looks like. That means your answer could be within the ranges of where the arrow is facing, not between. So here, let's say if we can do a 1. If we choose a number between here, like the absolute value of 1 is greater than 3, the absolute value of 1 is 1. 1 is greater than 3, that statement is false. That's why they're saying the ranges of x has to be between this and this range. Next one. Now we have an expression between the parentheses, so that means we have a couple things going on. All that means is just like how you solve the other ones, you just have to include the expression between the two brackets. So now, here, x, the absolute value of x minus 5 is less than or equal to 3. Here, I have up here, but it's exactly the same way as you saw from the beginning. So if you have a less than symbol, that means it's between your negative solution and your positive solution. So your negative solution here is 3. If you notice, nothing's on the outside, nothing is adding or subtracting into the absolute value. It's just between it. We're just focusing on the outside, not the inside. So that means we can move on to the next step, which means following one of the two formulas. So now, according to this, if it's less than, that means it's between the two solutions, between negative 3 and between the original solution 3. And now, instead of just putting x in between, you're just going to put the expression between the brackets. There. After that, if you look in the beginning, we always have to make sure the x is between, nothing is anywhere else. It has to be by itself on one side. So if we have x minus 5, now we have to go ahead and get the x by itself. That means we have to add 5. But keep in mind, this inequality has 3 sides to it. It has the middle, it has the right side, and it also has the left side. So you have to apply to all 3 sides. So when I do that, negative 3 plus 5 is positive 2, which is less than or equal to, keep the sign the same, x, which is less than or equal to 3 plus 5 is 8. And that's your answer. If it's a less than or equal to, make sure you include the sign, and it's just getting the x by itself in between the two inequalities. The inequalities for the and inequality is always facing this way. It's always facing. It's never going to be facing the opposite direction. Now here, the absolute value of x plus 7 is greater than 3. That means we have to follow by the second one, meaning setting it less than to the negative solution, setting it greater than the original solution. So here, I have wrote it down over here. So that means nothing is adding or multiplying into the absolute value. We can go ahead and move on. So that means x plus 7 is less than the negative solution, negative 3, or, so include the word, or, the expression between the bracket, x plus 7, is greater than the original solution, which is just plus, or is greater than 3. Now we have to go ahead and get the x by itself in this point here. So to get x by itself on this left side, we go ahead and subtract 7 to both sides. We have x is less than negative 10. Keep in mind we're subtracting, we're not multiplying or dividing. That's why the sign stays the same. And include the word or. And here we want to solve for it. We subtract 7 to both sides. X is greater than negative 4. So now we have x is less than negative 10, or, let me put it over here, x is greater than negative 4, and that is your solution there. The last one is when we have a negative solution. So let's say we're just trying to solve for this. We want to get the x by, or the bracket by itself. We subtract 6 to both sides. If you noticed here, we have negative 2. The absolute value of x is less than or equal to -2. What this is saying is your solution for absolute value is going to end up in a negative number, and that is never the case. Remember, absolute value means direction. Direction is always positive. So here, let's say we pick a number -7. The absolute value of -7 is 7. Here it's saying 7 is going to be less than or equal to -2. Whenever you have a less than symbol and we have a negative next to it, that means we have no solution. So we have no solution. When it's less than, x can never be less than a negative number for absolute values. So now let's go ahead and move on to the next one. The absolute value of 6, or absolute value of x plus 6 is greater than 1. Subtract 6 to both sides. We have the absolute value of x is greater than -5. We were only subtracting, your signs don't change. And when you have this here, the absolute value of x is greater than -5. In this instance, it will work. Let's say we have absolute value of -10. The absolute value of -10 is 10. And 10 would be greater than -5 because absolute values are always greater than negative numbers. So it's never less than negative numbers, there's no solution. Here, it's always greater than negative solutions. In this case here, we have this symbol here, and you can't write that on your thing, but this symbol means it's a set of all real numbers. That means x could be anything. X could be 10, x could be -1000, x could be 7,000. And no matter what number you put for x, it's still going to be greater than that negative number. So the greater than symbol, that means it's a set of all real numbers. Less than, there is no solution whatsoever because absolute value is never a negative solution. If you have any more questions, let me know. Bye-bye.